Right, hello everyone, and welcome to our Education and Economic Growth Committee meeting for Tuesday, February 9th. We've got a whole bunch of people in here with us today. We have Hannah Bell, we have Ernie Hudson, Lynn Lund, Robert Henderson, Heath McDonald, Ola Hammerland, and Zach Bell with us today. And joining us, we have, of course, Minister Matt MacKay from Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture, and Deputy Minister Erin McGrath-Gaudet. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming today. We realized we had stacked a lot on education, and so made a real priority coming back after Christmas to really focus on the economy and dig down into our recovery plans for mid or coming out of COVID and post-COVID, of course. So thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules to be with us today. So you have a presentation for us today. Actually, before we get going, I better call for a motion to adopt the agenda, please. Lynn Lund. And so we'll jump into this. Do you want us to hold our questions until the end?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, that's great, Garland. Thanks everyone for having myself and Erin join you here today. So Erin will walk through the presentation. We'll talk about our current economic indicators, COVID response, pre-COVID, as we went through COVID, and some program updates and where we're at today, as well as our priorities going forward as far as what recovery looks like. So feel free to jot down some questions. We'll go through the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer everyone's questions.
Perfect. So just based on the letter that the committee had sent, we wanted to take a little moment to walk through what we do have as economic indicators at this particular point. So I'll focus on that first. So perhaps not a surprise to anybody in this room, if we're looking kind of pre-COVID, the economy was actually performing quite well. So a lot of the numbers that we had for 2019 were quite strong numbers in terms of our GDP growth, population growth, employment growth, retail sales, exports, building permits, etc. I think 2 weeks before COVID hit, you had just done the marketing launch, and we're looking forward to another record tourism season, and certainly we'd all hoped that 2020 was going to be another record year. Of course, in March, we were hit with COVID and all the restrictions and challenges that came with that. I will say, if we look, not to diminish the challenges certainly that the economy and PEI is facing, but if we look across the country, relative to a lot of other jurisdictions, we were actually performing quite well. Not to say that everything is rosy, certainly. So we have done reasonably well in terms of holding our own on population. Employment, while we are kind of down 3.2% in terms of our total employment, again, comparative to the rest of the country, we're ranking second in the country for employment right now. Retail sales have been quite stable. Certainly would be up in some areas and down certainly in some others, but across the board it has been relatively stable. International exports, we are down in that area, about 2.4%. Looking across the country, that ranks us third in terms of growth, or lack of, I suppose in this case, of exports. Certainly construction remains quite strong. Building permits are up kind of year over year, and the value of those permits up year over year. But then kind of looking at a couple of the indicators that I did put here in terms of tourism, that we are down both in terms of food and drink receipts and overnight stays. So then just drilling down a little bit more in terms of some of those key sectors that have been impacted by COVID. Here are some of those stats around tourism and service industries. These would be year to date, basically as of November. We don't have December numbers and all of these compiled just yet. But overnight stays down just over half of what we would normally see. Bridge traffic, no surprise there, down by about half. Air traffic down by 80%, ferry traffic down by 60%. We netted no cruise ship traffic, obviously, this past year, given the restrictions that were there. And then also on food and drink receipts, we did see a decline of about 20% in that category. So that would certainly be, especially for our portfolio, where we do have tourism under our portfolio, those are ones that certainly we're very concerned about, but are understandable given the public health restrictions and the travel restrictions that are currently in place. And then kind of hitting a highlight too in terms of construction. This would be an area where we certainly saw a lot of strength in the economy. So building permits being up kind of year over year, continued growth in residential investment and non-residential investment. So we both see in terms of numbers of projects as well as the value of those projects being quite strong. I will also say, you know, if you look at industries like bioscience, they had a strong year as well. We've also had some stability in a lot of sectors on agriculture, fisheries, though mussels and oysters certainly struggled last year. Lobster was relatively stable. And then also in terms of some of the key sectors that we're watching beyond kind of tourism and culture being under our portfolio, aerospace has been an area where we've certainly seen the value of exports decline year over year. Employment has been down in that area as well, and we have been working with those sectors to kind of try and support pivots and also, you know, reskilling and reemploying the people who have been impacted in those sectors. Anything you want to? Okay. Just looking at some of the forecasts, so this would be Conference Board of Canada. Looking at the projection of the decline for last year, because we don't have final numbers in for 2020 yet in terms of GDP, but the projection is that in PEI our GDP will be down by 5.6%, so better than the national average, but still not a number that we would like to see. Seeing some projections for modest recovery in this year, being up 2.1%. But then really, you know, anticipating that it's going to be 2022 will be the year that we see the bulk of our rebound happening here. You know, probably not surprising given what's happened in the tourism sector and how important the tourism sector is for us, that would be a key factor in these results, that it really will take kind of that full 2 years to anticipate having a full rebound. And then obviously there's the economic side of it in terms of indicators. The other side for a lot of islanders is more their employment. So, you know, we've seen some declines there. It's not a surprise. So drop kind of year to date or year over year of 2,500 people that have lost employment. The bulk of that being in service industries. So we did kind of break down as best we could here, both good producing sectors and some of the key industries and sectors under that heading, as well as service producing sectors. So it's about 2,000 that we're down in the service producing sector. The bulk of that would be in accommodations and food service. So 1,900 of that is under accommodations and food service. And then definitely worth mentioning that this has not been universally felt across the population. Bulk of the impact that we've seen to date on employment has been relatively consistent across the pandemic, that we did see predominantly youth and females being heavily impacted by the impacts of COVID-19 when it came to their employment. And certainly you can kind of see here on the bar graph, we have it split kind of females at the top and males at the bottom, but also broken out by age cohort. So for both male and female, we do see that 15 to 24 cohort, Euro cohort is where we're seeing the bulk of the impact. For males, kind of 25 to 54-year-old and 55 plus, we have seen pretty much a full rebound on employment in those pieces. Females, 25 to 54, we're getting quite close to a full rebound on employment numbers there. But for over 55 and that 15 to 24, that remains kind of a key area of concern for us in terms of programs and supports that we can put in place to assist them in re-entering the workforce and potentially reskilling to re-enter the workforce. So we did provide a response back to the Standing Committee in November of last year in relation to kind of the first requests that had come from us. So I won't go through everything that we had provided in the written response at that date, but we did provide kind of a breakdown of what response programs we had rolled out for both businesses and for workers during kind of early stage of the pandemic. We also mentioned that we have made some temporary increases to our innovation PEI programs, and also that we're working with our loan clients where we perhaps have some businesses that may need a little bit more patience in terms of meeting their loan payment obligations, that we are working with them. And then also we had mentioned, we had introduced the emergency leave provision under the Employment Standards Act. So if you'll recall, that was basically to provide job protection for employees who may be out of work because of public health measures or public health emergency. It would also apply in the case of a state of emergency as well, but essentially provided job protection if someone needed to be home with children because schools were closed, or if their place of work had been closed down due to public health measures. And do you want to just mention working with our federal partners?
Obviously, the federal government has been a tremendous help to PEI and everyone here. We've had a great working relationship with our federal partners. One thing we've adjusted and found that worked well, a lot of the programs we run out were gaps between federal and the province. So we've had a pretty good relationship running our programs through the federal government, them giving us indication of where they're focusing on. Every province has been different. So when we're on the minister's calls, every province has a different outcome. So we've always been able to express where our shortages are at, who's been struggling the most, and the federal government has been great to work towards that. So I know over the next couple of months, you're going to see some other initiatives come out of both provincial and federal government, but they've certainly helped Prince of Ryan and Atlantic Canada through this.
So to provide a little bit of an update, since the letter that we had sent back in November, the minister had sent back in November, but I believe we alluded to in the letter that we had been working with a number of different community groups in design of a new funding program that we have dubbed kind of the Workforce Integration Fund. So this was $4 million that we had allotted late last calendar year, to support employment programming for predominantly women, youth, those in the BIPOC community, to kind of reskill or provide them with the employment supports and career planning and supports and advice to enter back into the workforce. So we had designed this to be quite flexible because we wanted to be able to work with our community partners on this. And I'll mention just a few of those in a moment of what we've been able to fund so far, and we are continuing to work with our partners on that. Obviously in December we had a circuit breaker, which required us to kind of step up and roll out some additional programming, which I'll mention. But then I do want to mention, we've been really heavily invested in working with a number of different industry groups and stakeholders on recovery efforts and modernizing our programs. And I can't stress enough how valuable that has been to be able to work with some of our partners in both industry and community. They do have their ears to the ground, and many of them are partners in terms of actually delivering service at the end of the day. So we've been very pleased to be able to do that.
That's a good point, Erin. So through this whole pandemic, that's what we've done. We've worked with industry and different groups and stakeholders to develop not only the 13 programs we rolled out through my department and government, but everything going through now. The Workforce Integration Fund is a prime example. We've had tremendous uptake on this. Erin will go over a list that's been approved, but I think we had 36 applications in that one program alone, which was tremendous to get that big of uptake. And I think it's how we handled it going in as well. We made it quite flexible, and we made sure that all organizations expressed their opinions and views of where some of these gaps were at. So we've got eight approved as of yet already, and then we're going to 2 other phases, which we're working with the rest of them organizations to see what they can offer and to see what we can do to help them forward as well.
Yeah, so just to kind of, I'm almost repeating myself here now, so I'll apologize, but this was a fund that we set aside and really wanted to reach out to the community. So we had a couple of sessions one with a number of different community groups and another with a number of industry groups, to make sure that we knew what they were hearing on the ground. Certainly with some industries, while some might be struggling, there were others that were still quite desperate for workers. So we've seen, through the Construction Association, through the Bioscience Alliance, a couple of industries in particular really step up to say, we have room to absorb some more employees. They may require some additional training, but, really wanting to step up on that part. So there's a few projects that we have right now. So we've been working with Abequit First Nation, Adventure Group, the Construction Association, which I mentioned, Create a PEI, East Prince Youth, King's Playhouse, Council of People with Disabilities and Tremploy would be the 8 that we have approved right now. I expect we'll have another probably 8 in the coming weeks where we'll be able to finalize those as well. But really have to commend the groups that have come forward. We've got some really creative proposals and I think some really interesting program for Islanders who find themselves challenged right now with employment. So I feel like that's a strong positive. Just to mention the circuit breaker supports that we did put in place. So for those that were impacted on an employment perspective, we did roll out, it was a $500 emergency payment for impacted workers. So that helped approximately 1,500 Islanders who either had been shut down completely in terms of their employment or had lost a significant number of hours. And then we also had rolled out what was quite popular during kind of the first wave as well. It was a $100 grocery card for those who had been laid off. This was offered through employers that they would register and provide it to their employees. So there were approximately 1,200 of those that we were able to roll out during that circuit breaker in December. And then in terms of some of the highlights of what we've been working on so far with industries and what we've been able to announce so far, some of you will be familiar with the Food Island gift cards that we had rolled out in the fall, where we had provided kind of discounted gift cards for use in island businesses that had registered through this. So this was an initiative with the Food Island Partnership, and indications are that that has gone very well. I think they sold out relatively quickly, quicker than I think we had anticipated in those early days.
24,000 cards have been sold so far.
Yeah. And so that has been quite strong, and certainly that's something that I think has a lot of legs to stand with, that we hope to be able to use that and work with the Food Island Partnership in the future on other initiatives as well, such as through the tourism industry, being able to provide packages for accommodations providers that they would be able to purchase a discounted card and make it part of their package for somebody who is coming and staying with them, that if you stay with us you also get a Food Island gift card that is part of your accommodations package. The Love Local PEI campaign that we've rolled out with the PEI Chambers, which started up, I believe it was in November that they kicked that off. I believe it was around Small Business Week in October that they launched that. Again, just to promote the use and patronage of local businesses and all that they support to our communities. Also, just in November, we had launched a local advertising fund through Innovation PEI to help assist island businesses in advertising their goods and services in the holiday shopping season, to hopefully help some of our small operators capture as much of that very important holiday shopping market as they could. Through Tourism PEI, we've been really focused on tactical plans. Obviously, with public health, things can change quite rapidly. I really have to commend our tourism folks that nothing has been normal for them over the past year. So we kind of consistently have about 3 different marketing campaigns that they're working on, knowing that probably 2 of them won't ever be used, but they want to be prepared for being able to hit play as soon as they're able to, and whatever the public health measures allow. So certainly hit the ground running as soon as we could when the Atlantic bubble opened last year. As well, right now they're using their Activate Our Island campaign for a bit of a winter staycation product as well to promote that. Then
the draft strategy will be ready next week, which input has come from industry on this. So we plan on having a tourism conference. So as we done our marketing plan as of last year, we will not be having that this year. It's a tourism conference, early March. So we will have our plans in place, which come from industry, of what it could look like. So we know, if all goes well, that the Atlantic bubble should be there. What we can certainly improve on that. It was late in the year before we got the Atlantic bubble last year, with, for the most part, pretty good numbers considering. Looking back, I was very doubtful myself personally with the numbers that were predicted. We did hit around 34% of what we were used to, which, considering how late in the game it was to come up with the Atlantic bubble. So we've been very strategic, working on expanding that Atlantic bubble, as well as what it would look like after that as well. So that's supposed to be ready for industry early March to roll out, and that way they can start preparing and know what it looks like.
And then I also just want to mention, we have had some additional funding for arts and culture. We have been actually very impressed with the amount of uptake we had from the arts and culture industry on some of our other programming that was open for any businesses. So, in particular, our business adaptation advice program that had rolled out early in the pandemic. And then we're working with the industry on a couple of other initiatives that we hope to be able to announce in the coming weeks as well. But some of the pieces that we have been able to run out here has been an increase to the arts banks and arts grants, including this year we were able to add an Indigenous arts bank and arts grants, which we announced and did a call out for that, I think 2 weeks ago. So that's something new that we were able to do this year. It actually had been in the works and talked about prior to COVID-19, but certainly has been some additional funding that has been in place this year that wouldn't have normally been there. And then just to kind of highlight, for us going forward, a lot of it is really, trying to work with our industries, in particular those that have been hardest hit. So, tourism, hospitality, arts and culture has certainly been some of the hardest hit. So reliant on that tourism traffic to really, separate a year from having a good year. And as I mentioned, we're really working in collaboration with those industry associations and with the different stakeholders in those industries to target and support those measures as best we can for what they see and where the opportunities are that they see. As well, I know some of you have had this conversation with us as well. We're looking to modernize our innovation PEI programs to support current realities. That was actually something that was in our mandate letter, so it does predate COVID. But we're looking to roll that out for April 1st, so we're in the final stages of approvals on that. And then, so that's the industry side. Also on the worker side, obviously, as I've mentioned, there are some groups that have been hit harder than others. So a lot of our initiatives really are targeting those groups who've been hit the hardest. Working in collaboration with our community groups on the delivery of some of that supportive programming, as well as, I should say, some of our industry groups, where there are still many opportunities to absorb workers into those industries. And then beyond that, we are committed to Skills PEI came over to our department April 1st of last year. So a priority for us has been working on modernizing the programs that we do have there. So that will be kind of a top priority for us. Again, kind of looking back at those key demographics that are most challenged right now, being women, youth, and the BIPOC community. Do you want to mention anything else on either of those pieces?
Couple other things we should mention. They're small, but they've worked relatively well, and it actually turned out to be big. So we were worried in the fall after the first round of layoffs with Standard Arrow. We knew that this was going to be the year we were going to start to see layoffs happen. So we ended up making a position, employment connector through Innovation PEI. So what that job would consist of, when there's layoffs in a company, they can reach out to this person, and we kind of play like a matchmaker that could put them in another role or teach them a different skill set. And it's had great luck, even just using the Standard Arrow for an example. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but with that position alone has helped out approximately 30 people, Erin?
Yeah, we've been working with about 50 clients.
50 clients through that one position, so that has worked out tremendous. As well, about 4 weeks ago, we announced our business Navigator through Innovation PEI. So now this position, for any small business or business question at all, they can contact the Business Navigator. It was a big gap in our department that we found, and we've got great response at this as well. So it's kind of your catch-all. This contact person will be able to navigate the system, because there's lots of programs out there that a lot of businesses just don't know exist. So this is going to be tremendous support. So them were two initiatives that have worked out real well. I know they sound small, but they've really made a big impact.
Yeah, and then I think finally it bears mentioning that we do have the Premier's Economic Recovery Council as well, that we're kind of awaiting final report from that group as well. But when it comes to the longer term vision priorities, that will be something that we work with and kind of take some direction from that group as well. So that'll be something coming soon in the future as well.
So feel free to ask questions. We can take some questions.
Lynn?
I want to thank both of you, first of all, for taking the time to come in. You were very responsive in getting back to our group, and I do appreciate that. This has been a lot of information, and it's very helpful. I will say that during the whole pandemic, I found your department to be very responsive whenever you brought forward concerns. When constituents brought forward concerns, I found you were quick to address gaps, and that's critical in these situations. Now, I also don't think we can react our way back to a strong economy. I think we need to have a solid plan, but during that period, I found that to be incredibly useful, and I think you both deserve credit for that. So I'm curious, you were talking about the Premier's Economic Recovery and Growth Council, and I think that's sort of where the long-term direction on how we build back better is going to come from, whether we look at recognizing that the economy is, of course, supposed to be in service to workers and to people instead of just GDP. We have to be looking at the big picture. And I know that they haven't released any updates since June. I'm wondering if they have communicated information to you since June.
I'll take that.
There has been kind of a draft report that has certainly been kind of circulating and is close to being final. So I haven't seen anything in the last few weeks that or have an announcement date or anything like that I could share at this point. But certainly there's been a lot of work that does happen in the background to take the views of, I think it's about 20 people, and all of the consultations that happened with MLAs and with community groups as well, and to bring that together into one document that is cohesive and makes sense. That I think that you'll be pleased with the final result. I think Islanders will be pleased with the final result, but I can't tell you exactly when that date is because I don't know exactly when that will be released.
Lynn?
Chair, I appreciate that. That makes sense to me. So it's safe to say that the programs you're developing currently are not a reflection of that work that's being done, the 1,000+ submissions that were made to the Premier's Council and the 20 members. That's not reflected in what you're doing currently.
I wouldn't say what we're doing right now is offside, but a lot of what we have been focusing on, certainly in the last year, has been more that responsive, the more immediate needs. And then also when it comes to some of the modernizations that are taking place, those would be pieces that were in our mandate letters. So, we've been focusing on delivering that. But, certainly anything that I've seen from kind of draft versions of the report and submissions that have been made, I don't think that there's anything that we're doing that will be offside with the direction of the council.
And truthfully, everything is coming from industry and stakeholders themselves, right? So, some of these ideas, as we get through, like there's going to be a couple more come out here in the next couple of weeks to help the business community. It's coming from industry as a whole, right? Some great ideas that we just wouldn't think of behind a table, but the more conversations you have and the more people expressing their opinions and where some of the needs, that's really been able to help us out develop what we've been able to do.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. No, I wouldn't expect that it's offside from what they are doing. I just think that sometimes the business community might have one focus and the Economic Growth Recovery and Council, Economic Recovery and Growth Council is supposed to have a broader mandate than that. That would be looking at things like childcare, that would be looking at things like health, that would be looking at things like socioeconomic outcomes. It was just supposed to be a broader lens than that. So I would presume that the lens you're using currently is very worker and industry focused, not the recovery and growth focus. But you've pretty well answered that. I will save more of those questions for when we have the Premier here. But one thing I am wondering about the Workforce Integration Fund that was announced, I thought sounded like a fantastic idea, and I really appreciate the intention behind it. But when I was reading through the forms, it doesn't look like I actually have to specify that I'm going to be able to help marginalized populations. I don't see any criteria that would suggest I have to hire women or I have to work with the BIPOC community. It seemed more suggested than actually criteria in the document. And you mentioned that 8 groups have taken it up so far. Do you have a sense of who will be benefiting from those programs as a result of those 8 projects?
We can get that exact number. I know I've had lots of conversations with the department itself and asking those same questions. So we've tried to make it as flexible as we can to get as many people trained and back into the workforce as we can. We can get more of an exact number. One thing I was impressed with one of the numbers, 50% of the skills programming right now is currently in this last year have been women. So 50% is a good number that we'd like to see. So we can get an exact number unless you have it with you, Erin.
I didn't take all the numbers with me, so we didn't exclude groups coming through that they had to check off a box and say, you know, we'll be servicing women, we'll be servicing youth, we'll be servicing BIPOC. But that would have been part of the information that was provided when they did apply. So for the groups that we have already approved, you know, we would have one project that would be Aboriginal in focus, female, youth in creative industries, youth life skills, youth and creative, people with disabilities, are a couple of them as well. So that is something that we're looking at when we're going through to make sure that, you know, we don't want to exclude people necessarily, but that was the priority of the fund, was to target those populations as best we can. So that is something that we, when we're going through and working with these groups and finalizing their proposals, if it wasn't explicit in their submission, it is something that we are working with them on to make sure that we are hitting those populations.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate that. I actually have had conversations with two small organizations in Summerside that looked at this fund, were excited about it, thought it would be a fantastic opportunity, but the turnaround timeline on it was just too short. So I'm curious if there is any thought of doing something like this in the future.
We could certainly look into that. Obviously was the time frame with the federal money and the spend, right? So that was the main reason we pushed this through. I was real worried of the time frame of that myself, and when the deadline was due that Friday and we had 36 applications, I couldn't believe it. I was obviously with 36, it totals way beyond the fund that we've of the $4 million. So we're committed to try and continue working with the federal government. One thing the federal government likes about PEI is we're small and we can roll out programs quick. That's what they want to see. If they're sending money, they want to be able to see us spend it, and we're certainly doing that with this program. So I think we'll certainly have their ear when we go back. Obviously, with all these applications that have come in, we want to work with as many as we can, because this is good news. It's getting people back to work, with exactly what we want to do. So.
Lynn?
I will just add to that, maybe, that we do anticipate we'll have additional money from the federal government next year as well, but I don't have a firm number commitment on that, but it would be my expectation that there'll be some additional funds from the federal government to support these types of initiatives next year as well.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I still have loads of questions, but I can appreciate that I'll let other people go, and you can put me back on your list.
Okay. Hannah?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to be here today. I do have questions, but I'm going to follow on from just something that my colleague just asked, is that it's really surprising that with the Workforce Fund that has a very specific target that it should be reaching, that you didn't set criteria to require demonstration of eligibility. ACOA, for example, when they do funds specifically to target women in business, require that the business be 51% women-owned, or that the application of funds to hire be weighted to women candidates. I mean, that's the only way you address the gap. If you have, in this case, 20% of the workforce that are adversely affected, or that aren't showing up at all, like in some areas like they are for our international students or BIPOC community, then you actually have to target it. So I would hope that if we look at the numbers and see that impact, you know, that gap is there, that we can be a little bit more clear next time. If you want to see those outcomes, then the funds have to be targeted. And that's okay, right? There will be applicants. It's not like there aren't people out there who are willing to take it. And it certainly is examples of that being done consistently with government funding in other programs. Saying that, though, I guess my question following on from the kind of success of this initial fund is, you know, you're speaking a lot about working with industry and stakeholders. But some of these groups don't have industry representation or stakeholders that represent them. So, for example, when I think about very small businesses, which are micro businesses, for example, that employ 1 to 3 people and are often women-led or women-owned, they don't have an industry association. It's often not cost-effective for them to be a member of a chamber of commerce. They may belong to a local organization, but I'm not hearing that some of those more grassroots organizations that have large membership are actually being spoken to or engaged in the same way. So I'd like to know how you're engaging with groups that are often invisible.
Could you give me an example of?
Well, that's one example, Minister, would be small business owners who, for instance, Etsy, which is where people who create handmade items and sell them online to an international market are often single sole owners, business owners.
Right.
There are over 900 operators on Etsy and PEI active.
Yeah.
There's a Facebook group called Empower PEI, which has over 1,000 members, and most of those members are 3 employees or less businesses. They're very rarely represented in more traditional business representation organizations, but
Right.
they're also being hit.
Yeah. So I think in saying that, this is a good example of where this Business Navigator is going to be able to help out. For what's happened for the last 10 years, it doesn't matter, it's through Skills PEI or Innovation PEI, the economy was rolling so good for so long that a lot of these programs didn't get a second look. And that's, unfortunately, it took COVID to get us to this point, but it's really made us look at all the programs in a different way. So in the short term, I would say the Business Navigator would be, because this is how we're designing all the programs, is feedback, whether it's from even a lot of the MLAs that have reached out. Some of the things that come from an MLA is a great idea that we've been able to implement through some of these programs. So a lot of the one-off emails of little things, and they might sound minor to a small business, but literally print the email off or forward it off to Erin, and a lot of these can be corrected if you know about them. So this is where I feel the Business Navigator will be useful. I can go back and ask maybe to get a monthly report from the Business Navigator is what they're hearing, and maybe if there's some of the gaps through that shop, we could address them that way. So I don't mind certainly going back and asking for that.
Hannah?
Thank you, Minister. And I think broadening, like that's like broadening out into sort of, I mean, you don't know what you don't know to some extent.
Right.
So
Yep.
there's a whole group of really impacted businesses and business owners who are individuals who have never seen themselves in this space or even thinking that they could talk to Innovation PEI. So one of those opportunities is for the Business Navigator to go out and to look to where those organizations and communities are and connect that way, because otherwise they're not at the table.
Yep.
One of the other examples there is again looking at the groups that have been hardest hit, which is our women 15 to 24, women over 55, and youth. These are people who are most likely to be working in precarious employment situations. And when we look at service and hospitality, that kind of connects, right? It's people who would have been working in restaurants and hospitality, where they don't have a contract, they don't have a union, they don't have any kind of long-term support, and they're the ones that have really been hit. And again, how do we talk to them? And what supports are we providing for them? Because short of some of the federal programs, there's nothing really out there where they fit.
Yeah. I think we've all seen the big gap, and actually Lynn brought it to my attention through East Prince Youth. So we've always looked at the economy one way. We haven't looked at it in the life skills side of it and the training side of it, and there was a huge gap through that, which we've seen Roxanne Carter-Thompson, tremendous work they're doing at Venture Group. When Minister Hudson was in his previous role, we've had lots of conversations to see, what can we do to help with the nonprofit organizations and the training, because there's a big gap. If somebody is making minimum wage or close to minimum wage right now, they want to better themselves with a different skill or train themselves with a different skill. We need to create a pathway forward that's going to allow them to do that, and that hasn't happened. Nobody is going to leave a job that they're getting paid every Friday, that they're safe knowing that check's coming in, to a program that's going to pay them $800 a month to get another skill. So that's one thing that we're in the works right now, is to try and make that path forward easier.
Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, I think, when we talk about the need to have a long-term plan, we know that CERB and other programs have sort of helped to sort of bridge the can I pay my rent this month for a lot of people, though it left a lot of people out too, but it was and is a great piece. But that long-term planning says, okay, if we have a whole year or more of people who generally have worked to keep the wheels on the bus or to save up for college, and now they're not able to do that, what's that long-term income impact going to be? Because we now have people who don't have a nest egg anymore, or they don't have the money to pay for tuition anymore, or they're precarious becomes homeless, or the risk is really high long-term. And I appreciate the recognizing that there is that gap, but that takes a lot of time. So do we have kind of a short-term, medium-term, long-term for recognizing we've got 2.5 at least 1,000 people who are in a really difficult space?
Yeah, so we're expecting March to be the first round of CERB payments come to an end, or EI. So we fund 11 organizations that their role is to match them up. So between my department and them 11 organizations, we're getting a handle on the number of how many people will be affected in March that we can work, whether it's 700, whether it's 1,000, whether it's 1,500, to work with them 11 organizations to create the path forward, as well as their skills PEI to get them in the right direction. So we're expecting our first round in March.
Okay.
Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. And I guess it's really good to hear the skills PEI is now under your department, because that was just a really difficult logistical gap, and I know you and I have talked a couple of times about that challenge. We know that the majority of the funds for skills PEI are via the Labour Market Development Agreement, the LMDA agreement, which is linked to EI eligibility. And you'd mentioned that around the kind of the cap on the funds. So is that something that you're working with the federal government to be able to sort of really change those restrictions that are on how the LMDA can be applied here?
Yeah, certainly. So we've brought that up on numerous calls. The rules on the federal side have been so tight, and there hasn't been much leniency in it up until COVID. So I found now that COVID has hit, they've really looked at it a different way as well. So we've had some great discussions. There's a couple ideas that we've floated with the feds as well that we're back and forth to try and come up with. So I certainly think there's an appetite from the federal government to work with us on some of those.
Thank
Hannah?
you, Chair. Yeah, I'll leave it for there. Thank you very much, Minister.
Lynn, you're next on my list again, but we do have a couple of other people if you wanted to.
They can definitely
Okay.
go first. It's
All right. Robbie?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Minister and Deputy, for some of your insight into this. I just want to reiterate a little bit about that workplace integration fund. I've been involved with programs a long time, and it does sound like it's a program that has a lot of potential. But I too was a little questioning why the deadline was so quick. It was just announced, like, I don't know, mid-November, and I think it was December 7th or something was the deadline. So is there a chance that that program will be continued into the new fiscal year to allow organizations to tap into that?
With the second round of funding, which we don't know what it's going to consist of yet, I would say yes, there could be a chance of that. So one thing we did before we rolled out the program, I think we had approximately 50 stakeholders, like I say, the Adventure Group, East Prince Youth, they were all on a web call, and this is where we've kind of developed some of it and explained what we were doing. We were trying to be proactive with it, but in essence, the reason is because the money had to be spent by the end of March, I guess, or shortly after. So with 36 applications that have come in, we've kind of scaled them down. So we know these first 8 were ready to roll out. They've had people in line. The names were there. We could work through it. Now we've gone back on the next 8 with the department that we just need a little more information. We're going with and then we're going to the third phase. So depending on what comes with the federal government and what it looks like when the time comes, I would say there would be an appetite, but we want to make sure that what we're doing now does work. We need to keep track of, and here's an example. So we'll use the Adventure Group. So the day I was out to visit the Adventure Group, there was 14 people that were graduating that day. I want to be able to see, out of them 14 people that went through, where they ended up, right? Where are they working now? How's their lives going? Is there any difficulties for them? Which that hasn't been done in the past. And this is where we need to do a better job. All these programs we're funding, and anyone that's on this list right now, we need to be able to go back and say, out of the 20 people you put through your program, where are they at? What are they working? How much are they making an hour? What are some of the difficulties they have? So as long as this first round goes and it works as good as we hope it's going to work, I would say most certainly we would have an appetite to do more.
I guess my other comment on that, sometimes it takes a bit of time to get, especially I'll say in more rural areas, sometimes people take a particular program. It takes them a little while to integrate into the workforce and start to reap the benefits. But I would say that the programs are a benefit. I think of the Career Bridges program and helping people deal with their social interactions and the drama that they sometimes face. So I guess I would sort of encourage, so if it's a case where the federal government doesn't come forward, I mean, we're saying that anywhere from $8 to $9.5 has been federal. What about your own department? Why wouldn't you put some money up for that to make sure that that happens?
Truthfully, if it works, I think we probably could. So one thing I want to use is an example where there has been a gap that Minister Hudson and I have identified. So people on social assistance right now, we don't do a good enough job trying to say, okay, what's the reasons they're on social assistance? Is there anything we can do through My Skills PEI that can get them better trained to get them into a job? And that has been a big gap between both departments. It's never been looked at. So what we've done now, we've gone back to say, let's start tracking some of these numbers. If there's 7,000 people on social assistance right now, how many of them can we get back into the workforce? So I think certainly if we see results with a lot of these programs, because in a sense it would be a cost savings when you look at it, right? So a lot of these programs, the Adventure Group that can roll a program in for 150,000 people to help 14 people that are possibly on social assistance out, could be a cost savings in a sense, and it helps the economy. So that's where there's been a big gap that we've been working with the former Minister's Department on. I believe the last meeting you possibly, it was a week ago on that one, Erin. So I think as long as we see results, yeah, we can do something.
I'm certainly, like I said, I'm familiar with a lot of those programs. As I say, I worked in them for years prior to getting into politics. But you do have some good programs. One I'll use when it deals with social assistance is the Job Creation Partnership Program. I think the gap that tends to occur in that is that we're not dealing with people in their like I say, dealing with the drama in their lives that tends to happen or tends to be a bit more frequent with people of lower income. And so I certainly would encourage things like the Career Bridges program. We have institutions that are out there that provide and helping deal with some of those gaps to employment and barriers that they're faced with. And but we really don't make that as a prerequisite. It's you will get you enough EI, so you come off social assistance, you get your EI going, but then they kind of go back into the regular routine, I guess, and then it's back to that program again. So they tend to seem to be in the same programs over and over again, right? And I don't have a problem with that, but there needs to be some stipulations or guidance to maybe break the cycle and break the trend. So that's where I'm just throwing that out to you. If you can somehow integrate or incorporate that into some of the programs.
And a lot of it comes back to what Lynn had brought up to me in the fall is the life skills side of it. And I go back to East Prince Youth. They teach life skills before they get into some of the next programs, right? I could give you an example. One young lady, she took that program and little things that she didn't know how to do her laundry, do little things that you would just assume a 21-year-old person would know how to do. So by teaching life skills, it opens the doors up for so much more, and just even the confidence in them. A lot of these programs or organizations, the nonprofits, have been neglected financially for the last however many years. They're fighting every year for core funding, and they shouldn't be fighting every year for core funding. If they can show the results and provide what they say they can do and do so well at, let's fund them. And that's where we're at now. We were able to fund Adventure Group with long-term funding. They've been fighting for 10 years to get long-term funding, and I've seen the results of what happens with that good programming like that, and we've got no problem. If they're going to have results, we're going to supply the money for them.
Minister, you made some statements there. The employment dropped 3 to 4%. Our participation in the workforce seems to have declined. But in my few travels that I've had since COVID hit, one of the issues that I'm running into from business, they can't find workers. Yeah. So I'm finding there's a bit of an oxymoron of what's gone on here, why yet we got employers that are crying out for workers. And in fact, some of them kind of give me an earful that he's got to stop giving money out to people because there's no incentive to then come to work. So what are you seeing as a response to that, or how do you respond to employers? Maybe you're not hearing it. I'm just hearing it in my district, but it just seems like an oddity there. So how do we somehow, once again, take that workforce that's declining and convert it into people? And I know your Workforce Integration Fund may help in some degree in that, but it's still a bigger issue that's out there. So I'm kind of curious to what your views would be towards that.
Well, the big part of Prince around why we're in the shape we're in financially and the success we've had with the economy between both federal and provincial programs, there's been approximately $700 million come to PEI alone since March. That 700 that was dropped right into the economy, right? So there's been a lot of good programs that have helped a lot of people out. I think what we need to do, one, the skill set side of it, which I think this employment connector will help out as well. But at the same time, we got to be ready. There's going to be a time when that money is going to be shut off. And this is where our first round, we're expecting in March to have people in panic mode. I've had numerous examples where I've had people call. I can't even tell you how many times I've had people call and looking for a job or whatever, and then we've sent them, because we always have employers calling, like yourself. Well, this person's hiring. I see some of us share it on our social media. Hal Perry's great for when a job comes up. You yourself, Rob, when a job comes up. And a lot of these employers are struggling to find anybody, right? So there's a big gap there, which we need to prepare for, because it's going to come where the federal money is going to be shut off. If you recall, early on the spring, this was a concern with the Premier, with the CERB money, and he completely got crucified on the media when he predicted this exact thing was going to happen, because there was that much money coming out of the feds at the time. So it is something we knew was coming, and this is where we've got to be prepared for, because there is a lot of employers right now trying to find people for a skilled workforce. Construction alone, you look at construction, we're 600 people short today in industry, let alone in 5 years. The problem we're into now, we can't find people to build the buildings we're in. What that number would be if the workforce was there, right? So we're breaking records with what we have once again. So this is where we need to look outside the box and try and make it as easy path forward as we can. Just going back to the construction side, we've got contractors now that are willing to train on their own. Just find the body and I will train on my own, right, which is good. So I think we're starting to see people look at it different than they ever have before, and it's constantly maneuvering and working through the different skill sets and programs of what we can do to make a pathway forward to help. And I'm always open to suggestions. I hope everybody knows a lot of the ideas that I've been able to implement have come from people like yourself, right? I don't care where the idea comes from. It's a good idea, pass it on, and we'll do our best to make it work.
Rob?
I'll just ask one more and let it go around, and may have some more later on. But one that it gets back to our campgrounds and our tourism industry. I've sort of struggled with this as an observer in watching our campgrounds. We only were allowed to go to 50% capacity, I think, last year. And it didn't seem to logically make a lot of sense in the respect, like has COVID ever been spread through campgrounds? Most people are in their tents and they kind of keep to themselves. Is that a policy you're going to continue for the coming year? Because it just logically doesn't seem to make any sense. And what I've seen in some campgrounds, they would just have sections that they shut off, and then everything was the normal in the other part of it. It just didn't make any sense to me.
So a lot of the restrictions at the time were CPHO protocols, and when we haven't had to maneuver a system like this before, there's certainly things we look back that could have been done different. And looking back, we didn't have a lot of time. We've certainly learned a lot over the last few months, but still everything with that has to be presented to CPHO. They have to be able to prove it. It depends on the guidelines of the day. There's lots of things. We were getting pushed not to open the campgrounds at all. Well, there's 120 people island-wide work at our provincial campgrounds, good paying jobs. We felt we needed to keep them open. We knew we were going to lose money on the campgrounds this year, but it was a matter of keeping them 120 people employed, to keeping our campers that faithfully come and support the provincial campgrounds every year. So I certainly think it'll look different this year, but what it looks like we won't know until we get a little closer to what it looks like as tourism season operates and what CPHO requirements are at the time.
Robbie?
As minister, though, do you get any ability to sort of push back on some of these rules? I mean, say, as an example, that would be one. I'm not aware of any COVID ever spread through camping. And, it seems an illogical policy, I guess, it doesn't seem to convey with anything that I can see of, and it just...
Yeah, certainly. So I've always expressed more for the industry side of it, right? As the minister, I represent the industry as a whole. I take their feedback and always talk to Dr. Morrison and her staff on that. At the same time, I would never want to question Dr. Morrison's ability she's done a tremendous job navigating, and this is why we're the envy of the country. So I certainly express their views and opinions, but at the same time, I would never push her to make a change that she wouldn't be comfortable with.
Okay. Heath?
Thanks for the presentation. Just in regards to tourism in that sector, I know obviously we have the 4% or whatever is lost job growth. So we're moving into the tourism season again, and I know you're coming out with a strategy, but what do you anticipate happening? Very seasonal workforce, going to be very limited workforce again. CERB is discontinuing, and if the numbers were correct that I was given, there was 34,000 people on CERB, which is a third of our workforce. So I guess, for those, that demographic that usually works in that industry, what's going to happen to that group this summer?
So I'll get the exact number, but we're nowhere close to 34,000 anymore. We believe it's in the vicinity of 2,000 to 3,000, which we're waiting confirmation back. So that sector, obviously, we're not expecting a bumper tourism year this year. I think industry knows that. Is it going to be better than last year? Most certainly, but what does it look like until we get going, and how the rest of the country looks, we still don't know. We've changed some of our programs around. So a lot of these programs, when we rolled it at the time, was for the day. We didn't know what it would look like. So for example, the tourism interest relief, we've extended that now till the end of September. So that'll give the tourism operators a peace of mind, knowing that will be covered. The wage subsidy has been tremendous for the tourism industry. Every second week on my minister's call with the feds, we're continuing to push that. We've certainly seen that the wage subsidy covered a wide raft of business. Not everybody needed the wage subsidy. There's a lot of businesses that profited quite well over COVID. But tourism has been hit harder than any other industry. If there's any more support coming from the federal government on that side, it needs to be focused on the tourism side of it. And we're going to continue working with our programs the best we can. So as the year goes, and like I say, we feel that our number is going to be higher than what it was last year. But to get back to even remotely close to what a normal tourism season, we still figure we're 2022 away yet.
Heath?
Yeah, and all those programs are good, Minister. It's just the employees, I think, are something that you should make sure you consider. The other thing, I'm starting to hear a lot about, and you have on your worker recovery, hardest hit groups include women. But in your economic valuation of what you're presenting here doesn't talk about childcare infrastructure. And childcare infrastructure is going to be part of an economic development. It's not going to be in the former minister's portfolio. It's going to end up in your portfolio at some degree, and I think COVID has really put a lens on that. So I'm just wondering if you can give us a little bit of insight, or is that something you're thinking about, or is it something that you're looking at, or where are you with that as far as childcare infrastructure?
Certainly. So that was probably the number one issue we faced with why women weren't getting back in the workforce was childcare. We recognized that early on. We met with the Minister of Education on that as well. But I know that's something that the Premier is working with the Prime Minister directly on, so I'm not privy to what that looks like, but it's definitely one of the number one priorities out of the Premier's office right now, and I know he'll be given an update once he knows more, but I think everybody can say that's the number one reason, an issue we're facing right now, we need to rectify it.
Heath?
So yesterday I received an email from a lady that works in the gig economy, and no one's talking about the gig economy. Maybe Hannah touched on it, but to me there is a gap there, and and I'll forward her email to you. But they're looking at getting out of the gig economy and working possibly in healthcare, but really there's no avenue for them. They can't work and live, and they're not students, they're, maybe my demographic or a little younger. And I'm just wondering what you're doing with the post-secondaries to alleviate some of this pressure through now that you have skills. So what can you guys do to take someone like that was in the gig economy and then wants to change a career midlife?
Great example. That was a point that I just brought up there a few minutes ago, was we've got to make it as easy as we can for somebody to get a trade or a skill. And like I say, they expect they need that check on Friday. They count on it, So it's a big commitment. It's a lot of fear when somebody leaves a position to go into something else. We need to create that path forward, and that's what we're doing through skills right now. So we've identified all the gaps, or working on identifying all the gaps of what some of these are. And a lot of them have come from the nonprofits and the industry groups that we've talked to that say, and I hear these stories all the time of And to me, there just needs to be a path forward, and that's exactly what Skills is doing. They're completely looking at different ways. And one thing I find, a lot of these issues are such small issues that when somebody picks up the phone, they just say, no, it can't be done. They don't bother trying to work through it. And that's where I find Skills has really stepped up and are trying to make ways and paths forward and identify where some of the problems are at and make changes to rectify that. So feel free to send that person's email to me, and I'll have somebody reach out. These are the people we want to help out. If somebody wants to better their lives and move a different career path, we need to make sure we're there to support them.
Heath?
I guess, hearing the presentation and the discussion around the Premier's Council and that, and we're coming up pretty near a year on COVID. So I guess my fear is, and I thought it was June when they were cutting CERB off, so my negligence on that, but March even puts this in people are going to be in panic mode here, and we've been dealing with this for almost a year, so I'm not, I will criticize a little bit. I think government is really slow in the exit strategy. I think that needs to ramp up, and I think for everybody, for all politicians especially, that I think the exit strategy out of COVID, and especially out of wage subsidies, out of CERB, and all those programs that have really been keeping the economy afloat in Prince Edward Island. I guess I'm sure you're going to get the calls, just like we're going to get the calls, but I'm a little facetious in saying this, but I think time is of the essence here, and to wait another week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we're into March and CERB's done, and all of a sudden it's going to be like COVID hit again for these people, because all of a sudden they're not out of a job, they're out of a check now. So I guess how fast is this all going to transpire?
On that. So I don't want to create any false panic here, because I wouldn't want to lead people to believe that there's nothing as of March 31st for people. It's just that's a federal government program, and they haven't announced to us yet what phase 2 looks like. So, certainly
For another 6 months, which we're not privy to yet.
So that was just one point, that I didn't want to lead people to believe that as of April 1, there's no money anymore for people. I couldn't tell you what that looks like at this
We
point.
just want to be proactive in case that does happen. We don't want that to roll around and we don't have a plan in place. So this is what we've been doing behind the scenes with that. As far as the economy goes itself, we know what industries are affected. We've seen some bumper business with certain things, and when you look at the numbers, some of it is hard to believe that PEI's weathered it out the best, as good as we have. But I'm going to give you an example, and the main reason is why, which I'm going to use Alberta for example, because I've talked to one of my counterparts there. They said they laughed at us when we shut everything down. How we handled COVID early on, they laughed at us by shutting down the economy, by doing what we did. And he says, looking back now, he said, we should have done the exact same thing. They kept the economy going, which they're paying the price for it now, because COVID has spread rapid through. They've got people out there that they're talking 60% of the restaurants in Calgary will not be able to hold on because nobody's going out to eat. So it completely went the opposite of what we did. So to get to the economy we're in now is because of the things that CPHO and Dr. Morrison had done early on that some of us probably questioned, wondering if it was the right decision. But looking now, our economy weathered it better than most, and we need to continue going down the same path with trying to be proactive with some. But the end result, we still don't know what it looks like. We don't know what this is going to look like in 3 months. But as we develop gaps and know that some of these issues are coming, we need to be proactive and try and keep ahead of them. Are we going to be able to help everybody out? Most certainly not. I would love to say yes, but that's what we're up against. We're trying to be proactive with this as much as we can right now.
Heath? I'm going to jump in here and ask a couple of questions before we go on round number 2. So Heath had kind of brought up childcare. So we know a lot of the gaps in childcare, and we've known them for a very long time, like prior to COVID. And now they're in our face and we have to deal with them. We can no longer push it down the line. And so how do you see this changing childcare? What gaps do you see us addressing?
I can't speak a lot of childcare because it's not under my portfolio, but I know it's the number one barrier right now for women to get back into workforce, which I've expressed that with my federal counterparts as well as former Minister Trivers, which I will also be doing. Minister Jameson has been part of them discussions as well, so I know that this will be a priority for her as well, but we need to do something relatively quick on that one. Now, I know the Premier, it has been a number one priority for Premier. I can't, and when he comes in to present, he could probably give you a bit of an update where he's at and with his conversations with the federal government. But it's something they certainly haven't turned a blind eye to. They've been working on this for a few months now, and they know it's crucial to our economic recovery is to get people back to work, and childcare is a number one issue for sure.
Thank you for that. So kind of along that same line, there was a government announcement not that long ago that said if you're interested in becoming a correctional officer, government would provide financial support to do that. And what we know about correctional officers is that it is a traditionally male field. They can continue earning for up to 10 years and get into potentially a 3-digit salary. And then we've got people working with our most important resource who are working 3-4 jobs, who are stressed to the max, who are not in a really good position to take care of our children because of their own life circumstances, which I can't believe we're still here in 2021, but here we are. Is there ever a thought, so we consider correctional officers potentially earning up towards $100,000 a year. And then we look at our early childhood educators, our special needs assistants, our intensive behavioral interventionists, who are not making a livable wage. And when they do make it onto the pay grid, they're earning for 3 years and they're still not making enough money to live on. So let's let that sink in for a second. Is there any thought given to perhaps looking at, a field like childcare and perhaps doing some sort of similar program for people looking into working with our children in their primary years?
Truthfully, I wouldn't know on that. I know when Minister Jameson reschedules to come back, because I know she was here today, that would be a good question for her. A lot of the funding would come through our skills side of it, but we wouldn't design the program itself. So we would fund, for example, the correctional officer program, but it would be done through public justice and public safety. So that would be a good question for Minister Jameson. I'm not trying to dodge it, I just don't know enough on it.
No, I can appreciate that. So the last thing I'll get, I don't know if it's going to turn into a question or if it's more of a comment, but we're talking about life skills, and I find it a little baffling that we are only now making the connection between life skills and employability and health. So, one of the things that I've said forever about a basic income guarantee is that it would do just what you had said earlier about identifying why people may not be in the workforce. And by setting up a structure like a basic income guarantee helps us look at that even more closely. And it helps us identify why people aren't achieving success in their life and allows us to pinpoint what additional supports and services they may require to live their best lives, to live their most healthy lives. And so, if we're finally starting to have these conversations, I would be amiss if I didn't throw in basic income guarantee, because that would do, if we put the proper measures in place, that would help us pinpoint exactly where people need support. And instead of just kind of it being, government being like this, we would be a lot more, I think it would be a lot more responsible with our money and responding to the needs. So I'm happy to hear that life skills are a part of that. I'm going to leave that there for now and come back. So Lynn.
Thank you. So I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I think that one of the big takeaways from COVID is that it's caused us to re-examine what we believe falls into the category of economy, and what relates to it and what doesn't. And that's something that I think is incredibly interesting and eye-opening. So when we talk about life skills, I was really glad when we were able to have that conversation, because when I was talking with East Prince Youth, one thing that they talked about is outcomes. You had said earlier, we need to be able to show results. We need to be able to demonstrate that these programs we're funding have tangible measures. But the things that we present, those numbers don't always tell the whole story, do they? So if the question is, I brought 10 people in, how many of them are now employed in the workforce? That's going to tell one story. If I ask the question of how many of those people have moved further along towards employability, that's going to tell a different story. So they told me that there are all kinds of people they would love to take into their programs, but because they're not convinced that without the life skill component, they can get those people into the workforce in an 8-week, 10-week, 12-week program, it's going to impact their ability to get funding in the future. So they are not going to take that person and move them along that pathway. I think incorporating life skills in can have an enormous impact on moving people, not just for their economic contributions, but also for their well-being, for their outcomes in life, for their impacts on mental health and confidence and all kinds of other things that are clearly related. So I commend the fact that you are looking at life skills programs. I think there are so many parts of economy that we don't talk about in the economy bucket, and we need to start. So I'm really interested when we have the Premier in to have an opportunity to talk about how we are going to make sure the economy is in service to people and how that is moving them along in their lives. I think it's incredibly important. We talked earlier about how Prince Edward Island's economy has done fairly well, surprisingly well. And a big part of that is because people had money. We had the CERB money coming in, and people knew they had enough to meet their basic needs, so they weren't afraid to support local businesses, they weren't afraid to support restaurants, they could invest in their community. I think that's a real lesson that we have to keep in mind. People need money in order to be able to do well, and I would be remiss to not point out that we're only increasing the minimum wage by 15 cents this year, when what we know more than anything is that people need money to be able to support their local businesses. Do you see that as a disconnect, Minister?
So minimum wage is obviously done through a board of both employees and employers. That was the approach that was mutually agreed upon. Everybody, I believe, in this legislature at one point. So for me to start overruling a board's decision, I just would not do that. I do know there's a pile of businesses struggling right now in COVID that they can't afford to pay any more than what they're paying. And I do know that a lot of people in this island are living under the poverty line in a big way. So somehow we do have to get to a certain point. Taking the Honourable Member Heath his comment of people struggling, employers to find people to work right now. Well, there's reasons why, right? And I think we can all say CERB's been a big help to people. So nobody that is paying $13, $14 an hour is going to take that job right now when they're making less money. So I do feel there is a gap there, but whether it's on the back, I don't feel it should be on the back of the business community, but I do think it works into this basic income somewhere along the line that there needs to be a path forward that would both help for somebody to get out of poverty, a livable wage, but not break the backs of a small business.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. So that recommendation didn't come to the legislature, it came to Cabinet, and it was something government approved, but we didn't. And I do understand that it is a board that makes that recommendation, but I just wonder how many people who are making minimum wage are on that board saying, yeah, this is working for us, right? Because I think it's not. And we definitely hear of businesses that are struggling to find employers when we have people earning CERB right now. But the question that brings to my mind is, does that mean we're perhaps not paying people enough if they're making so little going back to work that it doesn't make sense to do it? I suppose I'm concerned that we don't want to increase the minimum wage on the backs of businesses, but we can't do it on the backs of the most vulnerable people in society either. So
I think that's probably where the challenge is at, that we have to find the path. And I'll use Hannah's comment with a small business that employ 3 people. If they had to pay $20 an hour, is that business still going to be around? And I think you would see a lot of them, smaller operations that just can't afford to pay that $19 or $20 wage. Is there a gap? There's absolutely a gap, but it's to get to that point that's going to work both, and I don't have the answer to that. I do think that once the committee, and we know a little more on the basic income, that there's probably, I haven't read the report, but I'm told there's been some great recommendations that have come out of that. So I do feel we got to get to that point, but what the answer is, I really don't have that answer. I know that the business community's struggling, and I know there's a pile of islanders struggling right now too. There's not an easy answer to fit that one.
Lynn?
Jaron, none of these can be oversimplified as easy answers. That's the truth. These are going to be complex issues that need to be dived into, but I honestly believe that a lot of that has been exposed in COVID. You know, our economy would not be doing as well as it is if all of those people had made minimum wage. They just plainly wouldn't be. There wouldn't have been any money to spend. People would have been enormously stressed, and the impacts on people's health is greatly increased whenever you are experiencing that kind of financial insecurity. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. You know, I have a couple of other questions, but they're on a really different topic, so I will let you go to somebody else.
Okay. Zach?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for coming in to present. Just a quick question. I found the tourism numbers like very, impactful, quite staggering, some of them. When you do have those calls with your national and provincial ministers, what kind of strategies might either the provincial people, because again, it really depends on, it's kind of like the pandemic, people are only going to be travel when they feel it's safe to travel. What are some of the things that maybe other jurisdictions are trying to implement to try to grow those tourism numbers being in a global pandemic?
I think from my conversations with my other counterparts, one reason PEI and Atlantic Canada have done well is because of our population. We've been small. We've been able to close our borders down in a sense to keep people traveling. So you take places like Ontario, Alberta. Ontario's got 15 million people. There's more people there, but at the same time, there's a lot more fear of COVID as well. So I think they admire what we've done because we were able to do it with such small populations. How they do it, it's a big challenge that they've got. You take a lot of them bigger provinces with millions of people, they can still create a bit of a tourism bubble through their own province, but at the same time, people have to feel safe to go. I'll give you an example. My sister lives in Calgary. Other than go to the grocery store, she's not going. She's got small child, and she's staying home and not traveling. And which is one of the reasons I think PEI has been put on the map. We were on the map before as a tourism destination, but really for how PEI's handled the pandemic, we're the envy of the rest of the country right now. And it's made people, like my sister, look and say, you know what, maybe I don't want to be out here anymore. Maybe I want to be home with my family. And we're starting to see a lot of that. You're starting to see a lot of people move home to be with their families, to change their lifestyle a bit. And it's for that reason. So I think you're going to see a big population bump with that as well, just through the pandemic.
Zach?
Thank you, Chair. And I think it was the second slide that Erin had put up there where the recovery into 2021, I think PEI was 2.1%. Was I right on that was the lowest across the country?
Yes, that's Conference Board of Canada's projections, yeah.
Yeah. Does that mean that there's that much of a reliance on tourism and the service industry?
Yeah, definitely. Tourism is huge. So, you look farming, fishing, tourism. We have aerospace. Lobster, nobody knew what the lobster season was going to look like early. It ended up being another bumper year for lobsters. But tourism has been the one that's been impacted the most. There's no doubt about it. We get 1.6 million visitors a year come, and they spend in the proximity of $500 million a year. And that didn't happen this year. So it's certainly a big detriment for us right now. The tourism operators are in survival mode, and we're just trying to keep everything going the best we can to help support them until we can get it turned around.
Zach?
That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. Really pleased, Minister, to hear you talk about core funding for NGOs. You know that I've been pretty bullish on this one, and this is why. Because we do download a lot of the delivery of programs, especially programs that are kind of bridging that space to NGOs. I know you've mentioned the Adventure Group more than once, but there are a lot of other NGOs out there, and a lot of those other NGOs don't have core funding. So I'll take this opportunity, Minister, to ask you and your colleagues, particularly Minister Trivers, who has a number of the social development and in education file, to remind them that NGOs absolutely need core funding to be able to deliver programs. And if you put new programs onto them without core funding, they can't do it. So
No,
that's my
fair
little-
statement. I'll
Yep.
bring it back.
Get that out there. The other point I wanted to make before I talk about your comments about people returning is that somebody earning minimum wage in PEI working full-time earns just over $2,000 a month. So a full-time employment on minimum wage is equivalent to what you get on CERB. It's pretty much the same amount pre-tax, $2,100 pre-tax, $2,000 pre-tax. So there is a pretty similar level there. To my colleague's comment around people who are experiencing trauma because they're on social assistance or other things, not everybody who does Career Bridges, which is a phenomenal program, not everybody who's in that program is on social assistance. Poverty looks like a lot of different things. And you can be poor with a full-time job and a house and a car. And you can be a very accomplished person. So it's a really broad range of people that take part in those programs. But the part of the reason that people who are on social assistance have more trauma is because they're poor. When you have only $982 a month to live on, it's pretty hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get a job, even if you are in a good program. So I do want to kind of reiterate what I've heard from my other colleagues, is that we can't expect people to do magic things and be super keen and excited about going out for job interviews when they literally don't have a clean shirt and they have no way to get one, or they haven't eaten today.
Great.
So we do have to kind of be careful of making big statements, but we also have to recognize who it is we're talking about and what the additional challenges are that they have. Not everybody can do the things they need to do to get into the workforce, and it's not their fault. So supports look like lots more than, why haven't you got a job yet?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And that's
Yeah.
one thing, when Minister Hudson was in, we've had numerous discussions. The latest one was in the parking garage over and
They're the best ones.
It's exactly this, right? Let's find out how many people are in social assistance, how many, and try and figure out what are some of the reasons or what we can do. Obviously we can't help 7,000 people out overnight, but we might be able to help out 200 overnight and find, let's start there and let's start somewhere instead of leaving it the way it is right now, because we know it's not working the way it is. So let's think outside the box. And that was the last conversation we had until he got his job
A new
promotion
gig.
there last week. So I haven't had the opportunity to talk to Trivers on this one as of yet, but I will be.
Hannah?
Thank you. And I think that comes back to the piece around, we're talking about, and you mentioned it, Minister, that poverty, we know now that poverty in PEI looks a lot more than people who are on social assistance. So we also, again, like that
Definitely.
lens is about, you don't know when you're looking at somebody that you meet on the street whether it's them. I've also met people who are taking part in Career Bridges who are living in their car. So people are working really hard to try, and I think I find it, I'm very uncomfortable with these big narratives that say people don't want to go back to work because they've got too much money.
Yep. And on that note, we've had discussions, not myself personally, but my department, to see if the federal government would look at something. So if somebody's drawing EI right now, and we should be allowing them to work and make a certain livable wage to offset that, right? So I know my department has reached out to the federal government to bring that up. Because we've got a labor shortage right now, and even some of it's part-time. So if we can find a path forward that will not affect their EI and be able to top them up to a livable wage, this might be a good path forward. So there hasn't been any more than discussions yet with the federal government, but it has happened.
Thank you, Minister. That's really encouraging, because absolutely, one of the challenges we have is an opportunity, which is that we have a whole bunch more people than previously ever experienced this space of not having a job. And though it's terrifying, it's also a great opportunity to sort of say, well, here's that chance to make that shift. But if the barriers are not just, can I find the tuition, but can I also then pay my rent? That becomes a lot harder. So some flexibility in that route may really help us see that shift in what our economy could look like. But one of the things that you mentioned, Minister, that I wanted to follow up on is that when you talked about how many people will want to come home, which is absolutely what we're hearing. But we have a limited number we have limitations in housing, which you may have spoken about once or twice. And are you concerned that sort of that challenge that we're having with housing, we know we're having challenges keeping people here in some cases because the gap between what they earn and what they can afford in housing is difficult. How is that going to help us if we can't keep people here, how are we going to also support people that want to come back too?
I'm more worried on we can't build them fast enough. We don't have the tradespeople to build housing right now, even if we wanted to. And that's where I'm more worried right now than ever before, is because we know that there's lots of building going now, but we know that we're going to have an influx of people coming home, immigration, but we don't have the workers to build right now. So truthfully, that's where my number one, which we're trying to think outside the box, is how we can help with that. We've seen one of the fundings with Sam Sanderson, the Construction Association, with their training center, that certainly, but even that, I believe they're taking 14 people, Erin? So we've got a shortage of 600 people right now. So, I think we got to work as a whole. We got to work with Holland College. We got to work with the contractors itself. We have contractors right now that will sponsor somebody to say, listen, I will take that person. I'll take 3 people if you can find them. I'll train them myself. So I think this is where we need to start thinking outside the box and in different paths forward, because with the amount of building going on right now, like I even know some of the projects government has done in the past, we've seen shortages because of how busy everybody is and to get some of these projects off the ground. So but that's where I'm more worried at this point is how quick we can get them up.
Yeah, that's the question. Thank you, Chair. And absolutely, and I'll just point out that the training centre is in the top of the Parkdale Sherwood Lions bingo hall. And part of it is COVID, the limitations of what they can do in the space. But to be fair, Minister, that was a problem before COVID. And we've had, like to my colleague's point, we've had a large chunk of time to be, and we went and spoke to Holland College just recently about their programs, and they haven't increased significantly the number of seats in their programs. So there's a gap somewhere in there. We're also hearing that the tuition is a barrier. When people haven't had income and they're worried about, they need to keep any money they've got so they can pay rent, they can't fork out 12 grand for the tuition. So some of that creativity may yet again be down to money.
For sure.
Right.
And truthfully, when we took skills over during COVID, it was April 1st before we ever got it, right? So once it was, right off the bat, we started looking of innovative ways and how we can be creative with it, and we've made inroads of what it did look like. So I certainly think there's always room for improvement on it, but it's we know the gap's there. It's just to try and work through it the best we can right now and do as much as we can. Like I say, I find there's lots of little things, which everybody in here has called at one point with a gap or a problem, that to me I'm saying, why is that not rectified? It's something so easy, just doesn't get looked at. So when we try and by making that simple change, you benefit 10 other people along doing it, right? So that's one thing I find that we need to continue doing.
Sorry, I do have one more.
Yeah, Hannah, go ahead.
Sorry, being chief minister, I just like a couple of really quick thing. There was just an article just very recently about engaging with newcomers to train in trades by using VR, which is about kind of upskilling existing skill sets, which is phenomenal, and it speaks to the BIPOC support that we were looking for earlier. But I have actually contacted you about challenges for somebody who wanted to apply to the Trade Horizons program and were initially denied funding. And I think that's an example of one where we've got kind of left hand and right hand not connecting, where you've got a real incentive and want to see women coming into the industry and into a non-traditional trade. Yeah. But your existing structures put barriers at every wall, and not every person that hits those barriers is going to be brave enough to contact their MLA. Right. Yeah. Or to make a fuss about it, right? Yeah. They're going to say, oh, okay, then, right? Yeah. So I think that's a really important example.
It was a good point, and I know as soon as we got that message, my department reached out, and I haven't had a briefing on it, but from my understanding, that circumstance, I'm not 100% sure because I could be getting it wrong, was that individual had already taken training in the construction industry, So right now, there's a shortage of 600 people in the construction industry, and that individual was saying they couldn't find work. So a red flag come up and said, let's check into this. Why can this person not find work? And I think that's when they went back, and so I haven't had an update on that lately, but I know they were working with that individual the best they could.
Thank you, Chair.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister MacKay and Deputy, for the presentation, and certainly I do want to pass on my compliments to your department. I think that you have rolled out programs quite rapidly when needed to be, and that those programs have been of a great benefit to the province business community right across the board. I think one of the things from the discussion that we have had here today is that jumps out at me is how interrelated different departments and different programming is. Going back to Matt, your comments about the discussions that we've had with regard to, we know that there's labor shortage, but we know that there's difficulty in certain industries, certainly in the construction industry. So how can we work together? And I would encourage, and I'm sure that you will continue to work with Minister Trivers on some of the things, the initiatives that we were looking at and chatting about. To say about things being interrelated and interconnected, that you look at the great work, and again, I'll use the examples that you did, Matt, there, the Adventure Group, East Prince Youth Development Services, but for ones to take those programs, in a lot of cases, childcare itself may be a challenge, that may be an obstacle. So that is something else to look at what needs to be overcome. You look at, the chair had referenced a basic income guarantee, and I think there was a lot of great recommendations in that. Hannah would note, though, one of the recommendations that I had a little problem with was the benefit reduction rate. And I think that, you know, as we move forward on programs, speaking with the federal government and putting forward suggestions, asks, that we have to be flexible. Just because a report came to the legislature doesn't mean that it can't be improved upon. So just wanted to put that out there. One of the things, too, that Heath had mentioned was the exit strategy. I see it that there's a need of an exit strategy, short-term, but also long-term. And where there's challenges, there's opportunities. We've talked about PEI, without a doubt, is considered the safest place in Canada, one of the safest places in the world right now. We do have ones that are looking at moving back here. We have certain sectors of the economy, for example, in Alberta, that are struggling and most likely are going to continue to struggle. So I'm thinking long-term, is your department looking at ways to recruit some of these displaced workers in industries, say, in other provinces, and looking where we have shortages here, again, for example, in the construction industry? And is there any potential of providing any type of incentive, retraining, things like that? Not just over the next 3 or 4 months, but over the longer term, too, as our economy starts to rebound.
I think that's a good point, Ernie. We certainly do to a certain extent, but not enough. There's no doubt about it. We definitely need to do better in that, right? One thing that I've always found frustrating since I've taken the seat is every department in government work together, but a lot of times we don't discuss. So yes, it's great for my sister to move home from Alberta, but she needs high-speed internet. She wants to make sure she's got a doctor. She wants to make sure she has childcare for her children. She wants a good school, and they're all intertwined. And that's where I find that governments today and in the past have always struggled looking at that big picture. So I think now is the time. Unfortunately, it took COVID to get to this point, but I certainly think through everybody's eyes now, it's made it look different. We all know, and talking childcare, right now, everybody in this room knows that's a barrier right now. We need to fix it. Internet is another one, right? So we've had struggles with internet. We had to think outside the box during COVID. The internet hubs we just put out come from Hal Perry. That was Hal Perry and Ernie's idea on that one, because they were struggling with internet in the West, right? It was a simple idea that was brought forward that we looked at it. One, yes, we're providing a void on the internet, but we're also helping out the nonprofits with a little extra rental money that they wouldn't have had in the past. So there's little initiatives like that I think we need to continue to do. So.
Ernie?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Matt. To move to different, and as I said, where there's challenges, there's opportunities, and certainly COVID has created challenges through the business community. But the focus of some of the programming anyway with regard to Love Local, for example. And what are the plans of the department? I guess a twofold question. First of all, do we know, have we seen any stats on just the impact of that program? Just for example, on farmers markets, like have they been relatively constant as far as the vendors there, what their income has been? Has it improved it?
I don't believe any stats on it, but talking to industry along, like I say, this is where we learn on a lot of programs, right? So I'll give you an example in the restaurant sector. So the restaurant sector is performing quite well considering what they've gone through. But from Monday to Thursday is quiet time. So we're looking at an incentive that will get people out from Monday to Thursday, which is something we're working on, which we wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for industry reaching out and saying, you know, we're busy on the weekends, but with the CPHO protocols and whatever, we can only put a certain amount of people in. Is there anything we can do Monday to Thursday? So a lot of these little initiatives that we've rolled out and that are going to continue to roll out over this year is coming from industry is like that. So one thing about Islanders, they've really stepped up in the support local. We've seen all the campaigns that have rolled out so far have had great success, but just the mindset of people really made an effort themselves. They didn't need a lot of convincing to spend their money locally. They wanted to spend their money locally, so it's been great uptake.
So just to follow up on that then, Matt, going forward over the next, whether it's 1 year, 2 year, we've seen the importance of our local business community, local entrepreneurs. It's been amplified. The importance of that has been amplified by COVID. Do you see that programming within your department may take a look through a bit of a different lens as far as how we can assist island entrepreneurs and existing businesses?
Oh, certainly. So not only the COVID program, so one, which I just used a few minutes ago as an example, is the tourism interest relief. We know that tourism operators will be struggling again. Are they going to have a better year? Yes, we feel they're going to have a better year, but they're still going to struggle, so we made changes to that. All our innovation programs have been revamped, and they'll be ready to roll out this spring for that reason. We've made some real positive changes with collaboration from Hannah and Heath on that as well. Just some of the ideas bouncing back and forth. So I think at all times, all them programs could be adjusted depending what the economy looks like at the time. But we're definitely in the right direction for it, and we've got some good initiatives going to be rolled out this year as well.
Ernie?
Just one more question. And if you could go back to a slide that hit international exports, it may have been the one just previous to this or a couple. So yes.
Down 2.4%. The big reason for that would be aerospace, because a lot of our aerospace equipment with no planes in the air, that's probably the majority of that number. Other than there's a little bit of a dip in oysters and mussel exports, but our lobster and potatoes and food have all been up. So that big number, majority of that would be aerospace.
You read my mind. A question, I didn't even have to ask it. Thank you.
Robbie?
Yeah, just to maybe follow up, I had 3 or 4 more topics to kind of go over here, but just on the whole issue of exports and Standard Aero comes to mind, and you talked a little bit about it. And you did mention like where there's a lot of people just about on the verge of panic mode here to a certain degree, not knowing what the future may hold. You'd mentioned that you're diverting about 50 workers from Standard Aero now, and that we already seen that airport travel is down about 80%, and that's probably in a good situation. I'd say globally it's probably 90% down, right? So there's a lot of planes not in the air. So what are you doing as a department to try to prepare for this so-called panic, which is coming possibly at the end of March here, to maybe help Standard Aero or try to the aerospace sector? It should be maybe more specific instead of stating one particular company, because I know Standard Aero, I have a significant amount of people from my district that work in that location.
So we've got a great relationship with Standard Aero. My department makes frequent visits up there. Actually, they're scheduled to go tomorrow, I believe. So we're always kind of asking and seeing how things are going. Standard Aero has rebounded relatively well. They've got quite a bit of business lined up right now. I'll obviously have a better update tomorrow. We do have a concern, obviously, with the Charlottetown Airport. You know, they've been impacted big time here. So we need to support the airport this year. That is part of our economic recovery as well. We need to be ready for when planes do go in the air again, that we get some of these flights back. Looking at it, we were in a real good place last February. We had lined up a direct flight with WestJet from Calgary. We had one direct from Hamilton that was going to bring in, I believe it was approximately 32,000 more people on them flights, and then COVID hit. So once it looks like we're getting back into the swing of things, we need to get back and do what we can to support the industry itself. And as far as the sector itself, we're just going to continue working with them. But from my understanding is things are going pretty well with Standard Air right now. They're the second largest employer in PEI. We want to make sure that remains. So they've got a good relationship. Usually if there's an issue, they're on the phone to us. But like I say, I'll know a little more tomorrow. I know my department is going up for an update and a visit. So, but for the most part, I think everything's relatively well considering.
Robbie?
That's reassuring. I really appreciate that, because like I say, I have talked to some of the workers from my district, and they're certainly uncertain, I guess would be the term. I don't want to say panic at this point by any means, but like I say, when you see the numbers, you really wonder. So I appreciate that reassurance, I guess, that Standard is in a pretty good spot.
And on a positive note, the PEI facility, from what I'm told, is one of the best. So you take the labor side of it and what they can produce out of there has really put them on the map. So I think that's one thing they've done a great job of is how good a job they do. It certainly benefits them right now.
Okay, the other I wanted to, Ernie talked on a little bit here too, but is the broadband situation, or access to high-speed internet. You didn't really talk a lot about it, but I do know that this is under your department, and I know the challenges are with that. And I do see in my district there's probably a section even in the area I live in that's rolling out that Bell is putting some fibre up in. But I'm getting a lot of calls once the people start hearing of that area getting it, then, well, what about us? What about me? And I was looking at one of your programs here, the Internet Service Providers received broadband funding, and that was supposed to end around the end of December. Could you maybe give us a little bit of an update on where are there many areas that aren't in any plan moving forward on broadband access?
Yeah, certainly. So this is every 2 weeks I get an update from my department, and every 2 weeks I want to see more people hooked up than the 2 weeks prior to that, which so far, knock on wood, we've been successful in doing that. So Bell is pretty well close to have rolling out the original part of their fiber plan. Obviously, as a private company, you don't know everything they're doing, so Bell come out with a wireless solution that we had no money invested in, which is covering a big void as well. So we didn't know about that until the day before. We have Xplornet right now that is still scheduled to go as of spring, that we've indicated over the last couple sessions of their plan. We had a call a couple weeks ago on that, and so far everything's still there. They've got a couple things in the works outside of us that they're hoping to do as well. With the Broadband Fund, we had seven local ISPs apply for that. I believe 5 of them 6 of them have rolled, or close to, some are rolled out and the rest are on the home stretch there. Now there's a couple that are waiting on equipment, no fault of theirs, that we just gave more leeway because of COVID, which is approximately going to hook up another 2,200 people, I believe, give or take a few. As well as we're waiting on an updated version of, after ExploreNet Bell, our local ISPs get out to what some of these gaps are. So you might have a road in your district that could have half a dozen homes on it, that fiber ends here, ExploreNet's not going to cover it. We're trying to find out what exactly them roads are, and we're going to come out with another pot that will help mitigate them last percentage. So in the next couple of weeks, we should have a little better update on that.
Robbie?
Okay, no, and I appreciate that, because it's not just a road, and it's regions like that are, there's nothing going on other than a bit of residential, and those numbers seem to be pretty small. I get it here, but maybe a half dozen people that have been able to access because once again, they're still not getting the site distances and things for the satellite systems that working. So, but maybe you can give me.
Without seeing the map, I'm guessing if they haven't been hooked up to Bell yet, that must fall under the ExploreNet wireless. So as of May, so approximately May, where they're supposed to have 17,000 there. 17,000, so come spring, you should see some of the numbers go down.
Robbie?
So, okay, another question. Just you'd mentioned about some interest relief for some tourism operators, and to a certain degree that makes some sense. But I mean, there's a lot of tourism operators maybe don't have financing through Finance PEI or maybe with the banks. But there's a lot of them. Is there other options? And I think Nova Scotia come up with a property tax relief for they all have properties and they all have locations that would that be an option? Is that an option that this department is looking at to provide some relief to?
It's been something that has been brought up, which safe to say that they're doing a costing on that, I believe. I haven't had an update on it lately of what that looks like. We've tried so many different, we've looked at grants to what it costs. Obviously, there's only so much money in the pot, and you need to utilize it the best you can. But I know that is one thing that has been being cost out. I haven't got an update on that yet, but I'll go back and see what I can find out on that one.
Robbie?
And my final question, I guess, will be maybe go back that slide that had our GDP on it, but knowing how the formulation works of transfer payments that come to the province, usually that's through equalization, and when you see some of those numbers in 2020, like I say, we're doing relatively well maybe in comparables to lots of other provinces, so that's probably going to have some sense of an impact on us from an equalization perspective. What sort of impacts do you think that's going to have on your ability to provide COVID relief as we move forward, as we phase out of this sort of malaise that we're in, as we try to get back to some sense of normalcy?
That wouldn't be something I would be privy to, but I know of all the discussions I've had with my federal counterparts. They do love working with PEI because we can roll things out quick. And while a lot of other provinces are on the phone beating up on the federal government, we're not. We're there. We're very grateful to what the federal government's done for us. So there's a great relationship there. I know the Premier, I'm sure, will be on the phone when the time comes, but that's info I wouldn't have, but I will be surprised if Prince of Wales will be impacted too bad with that.
Robbie?
Well, as a department, you'd have to look at those numbers and say that it's going to have an impact on equalization that comes to the province. So when it comes to our abilities to provide more supports and to provide a quick turnaround to get back into a sense of normality, or even things we talk about here in guaranteed incomes, we got to have money to do that. And it has to be a taxpayer. I know with Erin, she was with CFIB in her past. You have to understand that we can't put everything in the backs of business. We can't put everything in the backs of the federal government, nor can we put it in the backs of taxpayers. So who helps provide all these supports, I guess, knowing that those numbers may be a little bit smaller coming in. So I'm hoping as a minister, though, as a department, that you're at least preparing for that possibility that equalization is going to be impacted. So that pool of money, if we get $700 million already from the federal government for COVID under, say, 10 months or 11 months of stuff, and knowing equalization is going to be a bit less, we need to be prepared to still provide the supports that islanders require. Certainly.
Yeah, no, as far as like I say, we haven't had, federal government's been great with money in our department so far because they've been happy with what they see. So obviously the work Workforce Adaptation Fund. That money has come from the feds. They see how good we're rolling out on that. They've picked up the phone to us and say, we're sending you more money. So we haven't had that, we haven't had that problem yet. No, we haven't had that problem yet. So we're going to continue working with them. And like I say, I can't thank them enough. They've certainly helped all islanders out here with COVID, and I hope the relationship continues.
Good. Ola?
Oh, thank you, Chair. An honourable member mentioned earlier that PEI is a very safe place in Canada, and he's correct. Probably one of the safest places in the world, and it's remarkable because it's not as if we have closed the borders. I think we have let in, by my estimation, approximately 50,000 people since we closed the borders, but all self-isolated and controlled. So we have kept the lid on. But who we let in, whether it's agricultural workers, which I definitely believe we should let in, it's not really a health thing. It's a political decision that you want to let those people in, and I totally agree. They need to get here. But have you considered letting more people in, for instance, immigrants that are kind of on the waiting list right now, or long-term residents of any kind, with the same safety things, basically selling PEI as a safe place to go, and as long as they follow all the procedures, you welcome them?
Thanks for the question, Ola. So obviously all that goes through CPHO. Anybody that's making an application to come PEI is approved through them. So that's not something that I would have the power to do. Essential workers are obviously in the guidelines that they follow to get here. One thing, we're in a very safe place right now. We don't want to open up sooner than we have to. The economy is doing relatively well. It only takes one little incident to set us back 10 steps, and we've got to make sure that that doesn't happen. So at this point, I don't foresee any changes happening anytime soon. I think we'll continue going down the same path. And like I say, when the time's right, CPHO and Dr. Morrison, they feel it's safe, there'll be just some decisions made.
Ola?
Well, thank you for your answer. I think you didn't really quite get my question. CPHO does wonderful work in terms of the procedures and all that kind of stuff. I think it's a political decision who they let go through that procedure, and I don't think it's the government is basically hiding behind Dr. Morrison and say, well, she makes all the decisions. I don't think that's correct. I think you're making the political decisions by hiding behind Dr.
I understand the question. So you're thinking that politicians are letting people in across the border, or the bridge?
No. I think the decision which type of people to let in across the border is made by the politicians, but you're hiding behind Dr. Morrison when you say it. It's like, why would somebody, say, from the U.S. coming in here that want to live in their country house be any more dangerous than a temporary worker from Vietnam coming to work in a lobster plant? Doesn't make any sense. That's a political decision.
Well, I can assure you, honourable member, there's no political decisions being made with that. Everybody that's coming through here right now is done through CPHO. We do not pressure Dr. Morrison in any way to open anything up. She's got us to this point. We're one of the safest places in the world, and we trust what she says. I don't know if there's somebody that you wanted to cross the bridge that was denied. I'm not sure where these questions are coming from, but I can assure you there's nothing on my end political.
Ola?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply to open up. I think not opening up the bubble right now, even though some people would obviously want that. I think that would be a terrible idea and terribly unsafe.
You've changed your tune, honourable member. You sent me an email back in April, the opposite of that. You wanted us to open it up. So I'm not sure where your questions are coming from on this one. You've got me stumped.
No, there's a difference between opening up, letting more people coming through the very successful screening thing that
That's working.
that's working, whereas the bubble doesn't have that. So the bubble is quite dangerous. I was never calling for a bubble or anything like that. I was calling for opening up who you let in through the very successful screening and process that we have right now. I'm not saying that should change. As far as I'm concerned, it can stay on forever.
Once again, I don't make them decisions. That's all done through CPHO, and we trust Dr. Morrison's advice. When she feels restrictions ease up, that we're in a safe place to do it, we'll support her on that. Until that happens, it'll be status quo the way it is.
Ola? Lynn?
I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. One topic that we haven't had a chance to cover yet is international students. And despite the fact that they are one key group that we've identified that we'd like to retain, we're actually having some difficulty in doing that. As I'm sure you're well aware, I'm hoping you could speak a bit about what we're doing to try to support international students in finding employment.
Certainly. So back last sitting in the legislature, the student union had reached out to us. So one night after legislature, we went and met with the student union. I believe they gave us 6 priorities to them, which I took back to the skills department. We're working through, I believe, most of them. Am I right in saying that? I don't have an exact update where we're at, but I know the department is working towards that. We're going to do the best we can. Very good examples, a couple gaps for sure that I'm confident we can work through. So that's in the process now.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that answer. We also have gotten some great information from the student union. I was wondering if you could confirm for me if international students are eligible for skills PEI programs?
So there would be kind of 2 key ones. One would be post-secondary student summer jobs. So that one is completely provincially funded. So international students are eligible to be hired through the post-secondary student program. The other one that would primarily be of interest, I know the student union had raised this, would be the graduate mentorship program. So the bulk of our funding for that does come through the federal government, and we can't fund international students through that pot of money, but we do have a pot of money for that program that's provincial dollars that we can fund international students through. And, you know, we'll certainly work towards hopefully amplifying that in the next budget as well. But just the one challenge, just to kind of get down to the diagnosis of the problem, is that with any of our federal pots of money, we can't fund anyone that's on a temporary visa, so that would exclude international students. So we have to be a little bit creative about how we support them, and in all kind of funding instances, that basically gets down to us using the provincial funds that we have set aside through the department as opposed to the federal ones.
Lynn?
That's great clarity. I really appreciate that. That's helpful. And I'm glad to hear that at least the post-secondary stream is going to be an option. I know one of the recommendations from the UPEI Student Union was about creating an experiential learning fund, and I'm wondering if that is something you are considering moving forward with. Experiential learning opportunities, excuse me, is how they had phrased it.
Was that kind of like the co-op type formula? Yeah. So I know that's one, they're talking with our skills PEI department on that as well. I haven't got an update lately where that is, but I know they were going through the list of the 6 requests come in and trying to see what we could do relatively quick. So I'll try and get an update, and I'll send you a message once I do.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. Other than that, I will say thank you so much for answering hours worth of questions today. I really appreciate your department's willingness to meet with us and respond to our committee. Thank you.
Are there any more questions? I do have more, but I'm going to hold them. All right, so I guess we are good there. Again, I'm not going to say, well, I am going to say thank you again for coming in. That was very informative, and gives us lots to work with when the Premier comes in, and as well as Minister Jameson. So thank you again for coming in. We'll take a brief recess. scheduling. And so obviously the Premier was not able to make it in on February 2nd. So Alicia has the February 16th out as a possible meeting date for the Premier, as that no longer falls in a planning week. But we're waiting to hear back on that. As for Minister Jameson, originally we had thought she was able to come in the 16th. We've just recently heard that she may not be able to. So if she's not able to make that time work, we will not be able to get a meeting in with her. So just wondering how you might like to move forward. Alicia had proposed perhaps getting, if we want to send specific questions for answers. What do you think? Lynn?
Thank you, Chair. I would propose that we'll wait and hear from her when she is ready. If she can't come on the 16th and we're not able to have that meeting before the next sitting, so be it. We'll have her come in when she's ready to talk to us. I think it's an important topic and we need to hear from that minister.
Any comments on that? Yeah. So we'll wait until she's available after the sitting? Yeah? Okay. All right, great. And we'll wait to hear back from the Premier. Hopefully he'll be able to make it in on the 16th. We don't have any correspondence this week. Any new business? No? Nobody wants to keep this show going for a little bit longer? And can I get a motion to adjourn? Zach? Thank you very much, everyone.